If you're watching this video, you probably just finished Black Ops 6, or at least you want to know what happened at the end of Call of Duty Black Ops 6. And let me tell you, it is confusing, but the one question you're probably wondering more than anything else is who the heck is this?
We thought they were long gone. But it turns out they never left.
But there's also other questions as well, like what happened in the helicopter at the very end of the campaign.
Finish this. We have to get out of this.
Well, I'm going to answer all of those questions today because I must say Call of Duty Black Ops 6 is the most confusing Call of Duty campaign probably since Black Ops 3. But the thing is, this one actually makes sense. You just had to pay attention. So to understand the answers to those questions you're asking, we have to start back at the very beginning. The Black Ops 6 story starts out in an interrogation room. Daniel Livingstone is interrogating Troy Marshall, Jane Harrow, and Frank Woods about an incident at the Iraq and Kuwait border. On this mission, they are hunting down someone by the name of Alawi, someone working with Saddam Hussein on biochemical weapons. They hunt him down and quickly capture him, but as they go to extract him, Russell Adler appears and shoots Alawi in the head, stating that the CIA was no place for him to be because Pantheon is in the CIA, something we're not yet familiar with. But he gives a message to Woods. He tells him this.
Tell him Bishop takes Rook.
The hell's that supposed to mean?
Daniel Livingstone reams them out and essentially says they're on a very, very short leash. So they go and meet in Jane Harrow's office, and unfortunately, Frank Woods knows exactly what Russell Adler was saying. Bishop, being Russell Adler, takes Rook, goes to the Bulgaria safe house. I don't know how they planned that out, but that's what he said. So then our characters go to Bulgaria, where they find out what Russell Adler was doing for the previous 10 months. Basically, he was framed for the killing of Alex Mason. Basically, all you need to know there is that there was a mole within the CIA, and that mole helped Raul Menendez shoot and kill Alex Mason. So Adler is being framed as that mole, so he went on the run and went to this safe house, but all the while he was working on the Pantheon situation, trying to figure out what was wrong with Pantheon. But when he was at the safe house, he left some clues, one of which led to a person by the name of Savati Dumas, a mysterious assassin in Avalon, a fictional area that has a bunch of crime families, is essentially all you need to know. So we go to meet Savati Dumas and help her out with an assassination of a crime boss. And after helping her with this, she agrees to join our crew of misfits. All the while, Troy Marshall went to Munich to recruit someone by the name of Felix Newman to join us as well. So once we have Savati Dumas and Felix Newman, one's an assassin, one's good at tinkering, they tell us where Russell Adler is being held, because after he killed Alawi, the CIA took him into a black site, which just so happens to be underneath Capitol Station in Washington, D.C. So we have to sneak in there and somehow get a picture of the senator's eye. There's several different ways to do it, but once you do so, you can then sneak into the underground of Capitol Station, which as I mentioned is a CIA black site. The problem is, Pantheon got there before you to try to also steal Russell Adler from the black site. However, we are able to break through and eventually get Russell Adler out of the area. And upon speaking to him, we find out a little bit more about Alawi working with Saddam Hussein, and we need to go into Iraq to break into one of Saddam Hussein's palaces to figure out what this biochemical weapon is. So with the information we got from Russell Adler, we then move into Iraq. As we get into Saddam Hussein's palace, we go down into the basement and we kind of see some chairs set up looking at a container with a case in front of it. Inside it is a sample for a biological weapon. We find out that this is known as cradle. It is weird that Russell Adler kind of sees what it is and knows what it is right away, but he says he knows a little bit more about this, as well as we get a floppy disk with some information on it that we give to Felix Newman to decode. This is where things get wild. Based off of the information that Adler has, we find out about a facility in Kentucky. It's called the Advanced Technologies and Application Division.
Once we're inside, our target is the biotechnology wing. Adler thinks that's where the cradle may have come from. We need some answers on what this thing does.
Didn't you say Adler worked there at some point?
Briefly, about 10 years ago. He mentioned unusual classified programs there using human subjects. And suddenly the place was shut down and quarantined after a biohazard incident.
The cradle.
It's sure looking that way.
As we go into this facility, Case is working his way through when he falls down an elevator shaft into some water. When he does, his mask breaks, and amongst some various mannequins, we also see some gas. As it just so happens, this gas is Cradle. This is an abandoned Advanced Technology and Applications Division facility because that Cradle gas leaked into it, causing some problems. But as we work our way through this gas with hallucinations, finding zombies, and a bunch of other crazy stuff, we end up finding out some information. In fact, a lot more information about Case. As it turns out, the reason why Case is because he is known as Case 1. He was the very first soldier that this was tested on. The gas known as Cradle was initially made to create a super soldier, and it was used on Case, and somehow he turned out okay. However, Pantheon later wanted to weaponize this gas, and that's when we ran into some problems. However, Case works his way through the facility, running into zombies, running into mannequins, and eventually getting 4 key cards and eventually escaping. Now, when they get out of this facility, this is when Felix Newman is able to get into that floppy disk that we saw before, and we end up seeing the use of this Cradle gas on a soldier, on someone, to make them overly aggressive and made it so that you could control that person to make them overly aggressive. And then we find out that the person behind this is our CIA handler, Jane Harrow.
You did it.
Badly so.
Turn it off.
There's still a few more moments.
I said turn it off!
So obviously at this point, we need more information, and we find out that Pantheon has something hidden in Avalon, and specifically within a casino hidden in a safety deposit box. So it is time to pull off a casino heist, which honestly, this is a really cool mission. But eventually we end up making our way to the safety deposit box and stealing what's inside of it. So the entire time we were breaking into that facility and then pulling off a casino heist, Adler stayed in Iraq. So while staying in Kuwait, he was looking for a scientist by the name of Gusev, someone who has been working on Cradle for a very long time. And they track him down trying to escape Kuwait at an airstrip or at an airport. And they go into this airport in Kuwait and essentially stop him and end up interrogating him in a very, very aggressive way. But what they end up finding out isn't what they were trying to do with this weapon, but rather where it is being made. And it just so happens we know the place that it's being made. It is Vorkuta Prison, no longer a prison camp, now a place where biological weapons are being made. So we go to Vorkuta, and upon getting there, we end up finding someone who is there. Guess who it is? Jane Harrow.
We've done what we came here to do. The weapon has shipped. Now we evacuate before the CIA or the Soviets learn we're here. Clear enough?
Yes, ma'am.
Things have been quiet around here, but I don't expect that to last much longer. Come with me.
So not only do we go to stop the facility, we are now trying to capture Jane Harrow. And eventually, we end up capturing Jane Harrow and bringing her back to the safe house. So we get her back to the safe house, and immediately, Russell Adler starts preparing something. That's right, he is going to use MK Ultra on Jane Harrow to get the truth out of her to what's going on with Cradle. So we end up going on this like ridiculously trippy sequence where we start finding out about Jane Harrow as a child. And when we do, we find out that her parents were assassinated by someone within the CIA. And oddly, as it turns out, it might actually be Russell Adler. This is just one of many, many things that are questions left unanswered that we'll have to do in separate videos because the ending of the game doesn't really matter on this. But yeah, Russell Adler may have killed Jane Harrow's parents. Video for a separate day. If you want to see that kind of thing, hit the like button. So by the very end, we find out that Jane Harrow joined the CIA to try to find out what happened to her parents, but everywhere she looked, it was redacted. This is all told to us through MK Ultra. Now, at the same time we are interrogating her, Pantheon attacks the safe house to save Jane Harrow because she had a tracker implanted in her arm. So we have to go and try to defend the safe house, all the while Frank Woods is interrogating Jane Harrow. So we find out that as Jane Harrow got into the CIA, she couldn't find any of this information out about her parents until someone knocked on her door and put a floppy disk under it, where she found out that yes, it was someone within the CIA that took them out. We don't know why, we don't really know who they were, but we know that someone took them out, and that someone who took them out may very well have been Russell Adler. So from this, she ends up getting involved with Pantheon and going further and further down the rabbit hole of these biochemical weapons, specifically working with Cradle. We find out that their next plan is indeed to use this biochemical weapon on Capital Station, release it, make everyone super aggressive, and everyone attacks everyone else. As soon as we find this out, Pantheon gets inside the safe house. They stab Frank Woods and they try to rescue Jane Harrow. But luckily, we are able to act fast enough where we are able to track down Jane Harrow to her chopper. And in fact, Case even jumps and grabs on and fights his way into the chopper, eventually causing the chopper to crash into the ocean. From here, there is a vial of Cradle in the helicopter. Why, I don't know. But you end up smashing in Jane Harrow's face with said biochemical weapon. It goes off and Case literally goes insane. It's like he's having this for the first time again, but as we know, he's had it before, and he snaps and ends up strangling Jane Harrow very similarly to what happened with Dragovich back at the end of Call of Duty Black Ops 1. So as this helicopter sinks into the ocean and Case is losing his mind, seemingly killing Jane Harrow, the scene cuts out and we jump to 2 weeks later. All our characters are now meeting with Daniel Livingstone. As it turns out, they were able to contact him, and he was not a bad guy. He sent in CIA assets to help them out and help them get out of this bind with Pantheon. And he tells them that they can continue to work together within the shadows just like they were. Because, guess what? Pantheon is not gone. And in fact, there are still members of Pantheon within the CIA. And that's where we get the final cutscene of Daniel Livingstone's office. And the question, who is this character? So immediately when I saw this, I immediately thought that is Alex Mason. But what if I told you I don't think that's Alex Mason? Yes, there is a resemblance, but I don't think it is. I think we know exactly who this is. Now, some people are saying that this is Jackson Kane, who is the leader of the Crimson One division in the multiplayer. And I think they are trying to set up the seasonal story for Call of Duty Black Ops 6 with this cutscene. But what if I told you we have seen this character before? Remember that scene from the very beginning when Daniel Livingstone is interrogating the people in that CIA interrogation room? There is a scene at the very end of there where seemingly there's this stenographer recording the conversation between our characters. And we see him and it zooms in on him in the background at the very end of the scene. Now, if you put him beside that final cutscene, they look incredibly familiar, almost identical, if you will. Now, some people are saying that again, this is Jackson Kane, and it very well might be. But I think everyone is wrong with who this is. I think this is Case, the character you play as. Let's go back to that interrogation at the very beginning. In that interrogation, we see the characters of Jane Harrow, the handler for Troy Marshall, Frank Woods, and guess what? Case. Also, Case was in that mission in Iraq and Kuwait. So why wasn't he in that interrogation room? Well, I think he was. I think he was the one recording the conversation. And also, when we go to that facility, when we see all of the zombies and everything, we find out that, in fact, Case was experimented on 10 years ago. Now, why is that number weird? Because this campaign takes place in the year 1991. And guess when the Black Ops Cold War campaign takes place? In the year 1981. 10 years earlier, which means those events happen right at the end of Black Ops Cold War. Well, there was a little bit of a weird event that happened at the end of Black Ops Cold War, and that is Bell, the character you play as in that game, got shot. We all assume that he died, but what if he didn't die? What if he was taken captive, brought to a facility in Kentucky, experimented on, used gas on, trying to turn him into a super soldier, a soldier that we already knew was dedicated to the cause, would help out Russell Adler, and was there for the greater good. So they give him this essentially super serum, and he cracks. But then the gas goes off in the whole facility, and everyone needs to get out, and they need to cover for it, so they leave him within the CIA. But in that helicopter at the very end, when the new cradle gas that Jane Harrow has changed goes off, Case cracks. Case switches into an evil soldier, maybe the one that was brainwashed by Perseus. And he once again goes back deep within the CIA in Daniel Livingstone's office and is now one of the lead members of Pantheon. Now, I just want to say, I don't know this for sure. And yes, this is a theory, but there's a lot of evidence that supports this. For example, the fact that Case was not in that interrogation room, that never made any sense. The fact that that person who we see in the interrogation room looks incredibly familiar to the one that we saw at the end. Now, by no means am I saying that 100% Case is Bell. It just kind of lines up with that timeline. But essentially, there are three options as to who that ending character are. Number one, it's Alex Mason. Number two, it's Jackson Kane setting up the post-seasonal story for Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Or number three, my personal favorite, that this is indeed Case, and Case was indeed Bell. Or option number three, this is Case, and we saw him in that interrogation room during that first cutscene, and then we see him at the very end as well. And then the fourth one, and this is the stretch one, Case is also Bell. And yeah, that one's going to be hard to prove, but maybe in a future video. As I mentioned, there are a lot of stories twisted and tangled throughout this campaign that I did not touch in this video. And if you would like to see me cover those, hit that like button, subscribe. But for now, this has been the ending explained. After what I told you, let me know down in the comments, which character do you think that is at the very end? But as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time,